Welcome to The Final Word. I am very excited today that we are going to have a conversation with one of the rising leaders in our country, State Representative James Talarico from the wonderful state of Texas, who is walking the nexus of democracy and faith. A former public school teacher, currently in seminary. He is holding in one hand the echoes of Martin Luther King Jr., and in the other hand, he is holding the echoes of the yet-to-be United States of America, protecting our democracy. So get ready for this conversation with State Representative James Talarico. James Talarico, thank you and welcome to the Final Word podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
It is a delight to have you in Illinois. I'm sorry that you have to be here on the Underground Railroad coming to Illinois, but if you could tell our listeners why you've come to Illinois.
Yeah, my Democratic colleagues and I in the Texas State House left our beloved state to break quorum to stop the president's redistricting power grab that's currently going on in Texas. Typically, state legislators adjust district boundaries, districts for the state house, the state senate, the U.S. Congress, at the beginning of every decade to account for population changes after a new census. That's typically what happens. Texas Republicans did that in the beginning of this decade, in 2021. But this is different. Now they are trying to redraw those maps in the middle of the decade. This is 2025. And they're doing it at the direct request of the most powerful man in the country. And it's so that they can try to prevent losses in the upcoming election. And regardless of whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, we know that the ballot box is where we hold our leaders accountable, leaders in all political parties. And that's what's at risk here if we allow them to rig the next election and escape accountability from the voters. So that's why my colleagues and I left, and we came here to this beautiful city. And I just want to say that you and everyone in Chicago have just been so welcoming. Your hospitality, your friendship at this critical moment for our country is something we're never going to forget.
Thank you. We want to partner with you and your colleagues. What would it mean for the nation, not just Texas, right, if this redistricting were to go through?
Yeah, this is not just a Texas problem. This is an American problem because if they're able to steal 5 seats in Texas, which is what the president has said publicly, they will be able to do this in other red states across the country. They're using Texas as the testing ground to see if they can get away with this cheating. And that's what it is, right? I mean, I'm sure you've got some football fans that are listening. Football is very important in Texas. This is basically like 2 teams coming out of the locker room at halftime, and the team that's ahead says they want to change the rules in the second half so they can stay ahead. And all of us, we'd be throwing food at the television if that happened. We don't like cheating in sports. We don't like cheating in our personal lives. And we certainly don't like cheating in our elections. And so they're trying to see if they can get away with this. It's why we broke quorum. I should explain what that is because that sounds pretty wonky. To conduct business on the floor of the Texas House of Representatives, a certain number of members have to be on the floor. This is in our state's constitution. And so by the Democrats leaving the floor, we've denied them quorum so they can't pass these maps. So we've basically stopped this power grab from happening. Now, obviously, we can't hold out forever, but by doing this, we've shined a national spotlight on this issue, and we've mobilized other states to respond, which is what you're now seeing in California and other states as well. And then there was a huge march in downtown Chicago yesterday, and then in 100 other cities across the nation on the same day. So people are rising up, and it's not just Democrats, it's independents and Republicans too, who are just fed up with a rigged system where voters don't have a say. Politicians are picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And we should all reject that regardless of our party.
Now, there is a major shift happening demographically in Texas, and the Republican Party seems to be very nervous about that. Could you share a little bit about this demographic shift?
Yes. So Texas is a very diverse state. It's what makes Texas so great. Always has been. We're this big mashup of all these different people and cultures. That's why we have some of the best food and the best music, right? And the best culture. And it's why I love my state so much. But that is a threat to some folks who are in power, who don't want to see these rising, Black and brown communities starting to exert their influence in the political process. And so I mentioned that grabbing these 5 seats is the goal. That's the what. We should talk about the how, though. The how they do that is by intentionally dividing communities of color, Black and brown communities in Texas, to dilute their voting power. Right? There's a historic Latino neighborhood in Houston, Texas, that it's a pretty big neighborhood. So when it's in a congressional district, it can pick the representative of their choice. They may not pick a Latino rep, right? They may pick a Black representative, a white representative, Asian American representative, but they get to pick as a community. But now this new map divides that community in half and then takes both halves and draws them into white rural areas, which now have a bigger say. So you've watered down their voting power. You've intentionally cracked their influence in the democratic process. So these maps are deeply racist, and it's something that all of us learned about in the 20th century. I'm not sure if everybody realizes it's still happening in 2025, and it's something, again, we should all reject because it's deeply un-American.
Now, there's 2 types of gerrymandering. There's the traditional gerrymandering that we've heard of,
right,
and then there's also racial gerrymandering.
Right.
If you could share with us the difference between the two.
Well, and there's a huge legal difference. So in addition to this quorum break, we are also going to be fighting these maps in court.
Okay.
Because the Voting Rights Act was passed by a Texas Democrat, Lyndon Johnson, and we're very proud of that in Texas. And they've been chipping away at that Voting Rights Act pretty relentlessly. But we can still challenge, based on that law in the courts, partisan gerrymandering, where you are just drawing these districts into crazy shapes because of partisan reasons. That's actually legal. I think it's immoral and it's wrong, but it is allowed under the law. What's not allowed under the law is racial gerrymandering, where you're not just doing it based on partisanship, you're doing it based on race. And that's what we're seeing in Texas. These maps are an example, an egregious example of intentional racial gerrymandering. And it's why we think we have a shot at beating it in court. There was a ruling out of the Fifth Circuit in Louisiana just this week that surprised a lot of people, and I think gave us hope that the Voting Rights Act can still prevail in this country. And so that's going to be the next leg of this fight.
Now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your calling in ministry.
Yeah.
Your ministry calling is in the public sector, and you're currently in seminary at Austin Presbyterian Seminary. Tell us about your call, or I should say your calling. Yeah. Meaning that I like the term that one person said, that we should never say that we're called, but we are calling, meaning that we're always in process.
I love that. Yeah. My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas, and he taught me when I was very little that Christianity is a simple religion, not an easy religion, but a simple religion, because Jesus gave us these 2 commandments. Jesus was a good teacher and always try to simplify things for all of us. The 2 commandments are love God and love neighbor. And that love for neighbor is what motivated me to go into public service. First, as a public school teacher. I didn't go into politics right away. I taught on the west side of San Antonio, which is a beautiful, historic Mexican-American neighborhood. It's also one of the poorest zip codes in the entire state of Texas. And my faith is what motivated me to do that, to love my neighbors in that neighborhood. And what I saw on the west side was I saw the results of politicians who systematically underfund things like public education. I had 45 kids in one classroom when I was a public school teacher. 45 middle schoolers. So you can imagine.
That's rough.
Right. Yeah. It was right after lunch. So like craziness. There weren't enough desks for all of them. I had students sitting on the air conditioning unit. I mean, this is the wealthiest country in human history in the 21st century, and there were children sitting on the air conditioning unit. And so that got me mad. And when a seat opened up in the State House in my hometown, I threw my hat in the ring. I was 28 years old. I had no network. I didn't have any kind of political credentials. I was a former teacher, and I ran on fixing our school finance system and fighting for our kids. And so the work I do at the legislature is just an extension of that ministry. I am trying to make my neighbors lives easier through public policy.
Yes.
Right? Fund schools, reduce prescription drug costs, make childcare more affordable for young parents, reform our justice system. That is how I am showing love for my neighbors through that public policy work. But obviously, loving thy neighbor in the Texas legislature is not the easiest thing to do. And so when things get difficult, I fall back on that first commandment. And going to seminary, which I did in my second term when I was kind of hitting a wall in the Capitol, it was a way for me to follow Jesus' first commandment, to love God, because you have to have both. He gave both for a reason. Loving your neighbor without being in touch with, the ground of our being and having that spiritual foundation, it leads to burnout. But also, if you're just loving God and you're just focused on your inner spiritual life and you're not focused on what's happening outside the sanctuary, you're not following Jesus. So it's how do you balance both of these things? And so as a seminarian and a lawmaker, I'm just starting to figure out how these two commandments sustain, challenge, and enrich each other.
You're in ministry. This is your public calling and how you express your relationship and your faith with God. How have you been able to navigate the present doctrine, and I would even say propaganda, that to be a Christian, you must be against 1, 2, or 3 particular issues, or we have to cast you aside?
Yeah, I think it has been the result of 50 years of propaganda in this country by the religious right that somehow convinced people that the most important issues to Christians are issues that really aren't found much in Scripture. And I was taught at a very early age that that Scripture is our foundation, and it's where we always have to return back to. And so I get suspicious when people are saying that our most important issues are things that Jesus never talked about. What Jesus did talk about was serving the poor,
yes,
healing the sick, welcoming the stranger, and liberating the oppressed. Those are the central parts of my faith and the central parts of my politics. I tried, again, I'm taking my cue from Jesus himself. And so that is going to be my North Star in my politics. So if you've got Christians in Congress who say they're following Jesus, but they're kicking people off their health care, if you've got Christians in Congress who are deporting hardworking families just because of their immigration status, and not welcoming the stranger, or if you've got Christians in Congress who are cutting taxes for billionaires and raising taxes on poor people, I don't know how any of that is Christ-like. I really don't, based on just a plain reading of the New Testament. So again, I would just urge all of us, and me included, all of us, all believers, we need to get back to our roots of what does it mean to follow Jesus in 2025.
Who would you say are some of the people we need to listen to? Not necessarily just politicians, but people who are inspiring you to do the work that you are doing.
Well, I'm sitting across from one of them, and I do think faith leaders at this moment in time have so much to offer us that really politicians can't. And again, as a politician, we play an important role, and we are leaders, and at our best, we lead people to something bigger. But I think right now people are asking much deeper questions about what does it mean to be a human being in all this chaos? How do we make meaning out of all this? How do we remember how to love others, especially loving people who are different from us? And I don't know if politicians are best equipped to do that. I really think that's the job of faith leaders. So people like you, people like Reverend Barber, I mean, providing that moral clarity that I think is missing in this country. It's something we had in the last century, and it oftentimes came out of the church. Feels like we've walked away from that in some ways as we become more secular as a culture. And I don't know, I think the results of that haven't been good. I think the reason, especially among young people, millennials like me, Gen Z, the reason there's so much anxiety, there's so much depression, is because a lot of young people are growing up in an incoherent universe.
Yes.
Right? No one has provided them a framework to understand all of the things that are coming at them. And I understand the problems with organized religion. I know you do too. We've just talked about the problems with the church. But there's a baby with that bathwater. And if we just throw the whole thing out, I think we're going to leave people lost and unmoored spiritually. And I think that's an accurate description of what's happening in this country right now.
Now, I have a question that I always ask when I'm interviewing someone.
Yeah.
If there was a song, if there was a band, if there was a particular album that would describe you, what would it be?
You know, I don't know what I would have said when I walked in, but I actually heard some of your congregation members out front humming "Lean on Me," and for some reason I was sitting in your office and you were getting ready, and I heard them humming the song, and it just spoke to me at a deep level because I feel like my colleagues and I took this leap of faith when we left Texas, and we didn't know what would happen. But we have just been inundated with messages and donations, and one group of kids sent us all extra toothbrushes in case we, left ours back home.
That's great.
Like, we took this leap of faith, and the people caught us. Yesterday, being with all these folks out on the street of Chicago, seeing these rallies back in Texas and all over the country, we are really leaning on the people. We can only do so much as elected leaders. Faith leaders can only do so much. The only people who are going to lead us out of this are the American people. And so I'm leaning on them at this moment in our country's history. And I think that song in particular is speaking to me right now.
I love that you would pick "Lean on Me." Bill Withers was such an incredible writer and poet, and I think he speaks to, again, the nexus of the working class and those who've been marginalized because of their race or their ethnicity. And he does not begin his entire career until he's 36.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yes.
That's why that voice has experience in it.
Yes.
There's something about young artists, and I love a lot of young artists, but there is something about your voice having that character and that wisdom in it. And I think it's why it still speaks to us so many years later.
Well, I want to say thank you for joining us for our Final Word podcast. Thank you for being here in Chicago, that the Chicago community supports you and prays with you and the entire delegation as you are fighting for democracy and continue the good fight. And in the words of Bill Withers, may we lean on each other so that we may continue to carry on. Thank you for joining us for our Final Word podcast.